Hi, Group 1. I am recording a feedback video for your grant proposal early draft, the presentation. So I've opened up your selected CFP, the one on combustion and fire systems. I also have opened your PowerPoint presentation as well as your planning sheet here. So I just kind of went through this. I'd already gone through this when I graded these, and I emailed or Canvas messaged all of you about one of the things you're going to want to focus on, and it's going to be reiterative feedback that I give you as I talk about your early draft presentation is kind of your client and how you're approaching the grant proposal project, because there seems like there might be a little bit of confusion, though I could be reading it incorrectly. So I'm just going to kind of take you through what my initial reactions were to your presentation, and then hopefully that will be helpful. Before I read through the CFP. There's going to be a lot of like little words in here that I mix up because there's CFP, grant proposal project, planning sheet, and I think you guys chose a great one. It's under the auspice of the NSF, the National Science Foundation, which is a great program. So essentially what your objective is with this grant proposal project is you are writing a grant really in the form of a presentation. So you're providing a presentation in PowerPoint that is for a client, and you are proposing to the NSF, here's why we think you should give us money, what we call grant funding. And your job is to persuade the NSF in terms of, here's what we propose, here's how our objectives and this client deserves your funding, and here's how they will put it to good use. And I found, and because of your kind of lack of client, I did locate 3 that I thought might be good in case you guys hadn't already started doing that, just to give an example during the feedback process that I'm doing. So the other thing that you want to take into consideration, you have to take into consideration, is the timeline and the money. So I'll give you an example from my own life, because sometimes it makes sense, like if we talk about a real world situation, quote unquote real world. So I'm a literature person. I think I've said this before. I work in Shakespeare. So people or organizations. So an organization can apply for grant funding, or an individual can apply, or like a small group of individuals. And essentially what happens is either you work full time and you don't have the time to take off work to work on a project exclusively. So, or maybe you need, in order to, do this project or experiment or whatever it is, or build technology, your company or you and a group of people who are doing this research or building something, you need additional money maybe to fund, I need lab equipment, I need chemicals, I need this, I need rent so I could pay for a space to do it in, I need to hire this person who will help do this. So for me, because I work full time, I don't always have the time and money to work solely on projects that I'm doing. And so what happens is that I will apply to usually libraries. So libraries provide grants, research libraries. So I'm talking about the Huntington Library in Pasadena, or the Newberry in Chicago, or the Folger in DC. These are research libraries that have old manuscripts that I need to look at for the projects I'm working on. So but in order to help fund that project, because my job is not just going to say, sure, take 2 months off and don't worry about teaching, don't worry about your service, don't worry about this, just go to that library and just do this, right? They're not going to do that. They want you to do the project, but you oftentimes have to figure out how to do it. So I will apply to get grant funding from a library who will pay for me. So say I apply at the Newberry Library in Chicago and they say, yes, here's 3 months worth of funding. This will pay for me to stay in Chicago. It will give me a little bit of, food money or whatever it is, and then I'll be able to have access to tools that they need. And if I present that to my job, I say, look, I've received funding to do this project. They will usually say, okay, we will give you, this much time off to do it, because that the project would ultimately lead to publication, which is good for me and it's good for my employer, because it looks like they have or they do have productive employees. So that's why we apply to grants and get grant funding. It's that supplemental money that individuals or organizations need in order to do things. And grant funding is very esteemed. So if you are awarded grant funding, you've really done something spectacular, because there's not a whole lot of money that people are willing to throw around at any project. So for example, the selected CFP of your group, right, it says the duration of unsolicited awards is 1 to 3 years. They're just giving you an idea. So in your grant funding proposal, right, you could say our proposal is for 1 year, it's for 2 years, or it's for 3 years. And then the typical award size for the program is $100,000 per year. So you might say, if it's 1 year, you're working with $100,000 budget. If it's 2 years, a presumed $200,000. And then if you're proposing 3 years, then you have a presumed $300,000 that you're working with. So then you need to tell the NSF, based on what you're, if you're doing 1, 2, or 3 years, here's how we would spend that money. We would put this much money towards this much money towards that. This is what it would go to, and this would be the ultimate deliverable. So it's not just the NSF saying, here's money, go have fun. You have to persuade them that your project proposal is efficacious and that you will have a solid deliverable that is absolutely aligned with what they delineate here and there. This is what the CFP is about, but also it's going to give them something that they think is really innovative and unique, particularly with the CFP that your group chose, is because it's very specific to grant money that is going to be paying for the research and production of new technologies that are specific to, from what I can understand, energy, and they have this also emphasis on clean tech and clean energy, so that's obviously important to them. And it spans a few things, right? So they talk about the basic combustion science related to clean energy, and then fire prevention. So, excuse me. So essentially, your proposal would not address all of these things, obviously, because that's just way too many things. You would kind of select one thing, and then it just needs to fall within one of those categories. And so once I get to talking about the actual grant proposal early draft, which is what I'm going to do now, if I can find it, there it is, and then I'll talk about the potential clients that I found. So you guys are group 1, just so you know. You don't have to put your group number on there, but I really like your first slide. I think it's great. Combustion and fire systems. The only thing I would add here, and you want to, maybe it makes sense or maybe it'll help if you think about the PowerPoint presentation, because this is what you're going to want to submit as your final submission, and I'm going to talk about that in an announcement after I give all the groups feedbacks. You're group 1, so obviously you're the first group I'm giving feedback to. But you're going to want to, or maybe the easiest way to think about the presentation is like an essay. So, and in essays, whether it's APA or MLA, doesn't matter, your title should really be specific to or reflective of the thesis. So not just combustion and fire systems, but what are you arguing for in this presentation? Because you're going to be arguing for something on behalf of a client. So my first reaction when I went through your early draft is that you seem to be, and I could be interpreting this incorrectly, but it seems to be kind of a rhetorical analysis or a summary of the CFP itself. Excuse me. And I was wondering if that was the case because you did identify your client as the NSF. So if I could find, I'm not going to be able to find anything on here anymore because I close everything. Group, here you guys, here you are. So so sorry, I'm just trying to find the place. So you say, who is your client? It's the NSF, but just like in the Canvas message I sent, you don't want your client to be the same as the NSF. The NSF does not need help. The NSF is a governmental organization that are the people with the money who don't need any help. So they're the ones who are like, we're going to help you by giving you money. So, and then you as the grant proposal writers are saying, we want money. Will you give it to us? We're legit and we have a good cause and this is our client and they would use this money to do X, Y, and Z, which is really good. And it meets this, the criteria for the CFP that you have put out. So you're kind of begging for the money. Please give me the money. That's what really grant funding is. Just give me the money. So when I looked at your early draft presentation, it seemed to be kind of like a summary of the project summary seems to be a summary of the CFP itself, which you don't want. You want this kind of first slide to be like this, but I would think of it more as like an introduction or proposal objectives or just objectives or project objectives. So you want to go right into, this is the client, this is what they do, this is how they fit within the CFP that you chose or how they're aligned with the CFP that you chose, and then a thesis statement, right, would be, with this grant funding, X company would be able to do X or XY or X, Y, and Z, depending on, what the deliverables would look like. So before I go any further with this, I'm just going to give you or show you what I did to locate some potential clients for you. And then, so what I did is I just took two keywords from the outlining of the grant or CFP here. So I looked at this one, I just looked at unmanned aerial vehicle proposal. I told you there was going to be the words that messed me up. Propulsion concepts. And I also took biomass combustion. So I took those key phrases and I popped them into Google because what I wanted was companies that do this work, that work in this technology, and then in essence, that would be a potential client. So I found three. I found Ballard here, who I already have their vision up, but they are interested in this idea of clean energies. They work with fuel cell vehicles, so they seem to be a legitimate company, and they work within this type of energy and also this idea of clean energy. So that is a potential, like this would be a potential client, and they particularly work with these fuel cells. I have no idea what that is, but I'm guessing it's something that fuels something just by the name. The next one I found is this Northwest UAV company, and they are positioning themselves as the largest UAV propulsion system manufacturer in the U.S., so the Northwest UAV, and they talk about what they make, their technologies. They definitely look legit, and so this would be a potential company. So what you would, or excuse me, a potential client. And before I talk about like how you would position yourselves, the dynamic between you as the grant writers and then as kind of the go-between between the client and the NSF. The last one I found is this DP Clean Tech, and so these two were Ballard and Northwest UAV. I found through searching that unmanned aerial vehicle propulsion concepts. This one I found with the biomass combustion key phrase. So that's what they focus on. I was looking at their media to make sure because the first thing I want to do is make sure that these companies are legitimate and not just kind of like, yeah, we do this, and then they're not that at all. So, but the DP Clean Tech, they are, specializing in, excuse me, biomass combustion is what they do. And they're also very focused on clean energy and clean tech. So this would be, that would fall under combustion science related to clean energy versus the other two, which would be basic combustion science. So any of those three could be potential clients. So I'm, for the sake of just giving an example, because the only reason I wouldn't choose Northwest UAV is that I feel like they don't need much help, because grant funding is usually provided for those people who need assistance. So they seem to be, as the largest UAV propulsion system, I'm kind of like, my initial sense is, okay, you guys are doing well. I mean, it's not to say they couldn't use additional money. I was just, look, this is their research and development. But I feel like just by looking at this website, the DP Clean Tech, I'm going to use this as a client example because I feel like they might be in more need of money. Like they're working on this biomass combustion technology, and they're interested in clean energy and clean tech. But they seem to need more help than the Northwest UAV and potentially Ballard. But because you can already, this and the unmanned, the Northwest UAV, they've got all these partners already that they're working with, whereas DP seems to be like chugging along, like we're trying. So I'm just going to use them as a potential client. So say DP Clean Tech is your client. So at that point, right, your project, your introduction, or your project objectives would be to talk about how DP Clean Tech does these things. This is how they align with the CFP and with the grant-funded, with grant-funded opportunities, particularly the one outlined in the NSF's CFP that your group chose. This is what DP Clean Tech can do in terms of what they can create, or what it can help them with in terms of what that $100,000 a year, for 1, 2, or 3 years, what that will allow DP Clean Tech to do in terms of a deliverable that will meet the criteria outlined in the NSF. And that would be your introduction and your thesis statement. And then it's your job at that point to take the NSF through, okay, we've said that DP Clean Tech is, a great client for this grant-funded opportunity. Here's why. Now let me take you through the logistics and the details, right? And that's very similar to an essay. So, your introduction is talking about, here's the thing that I'm going to talk about. This is why it needs to be talked about. This is why it's important. Here's my thesis statement. And then my body of my essay is now going to give you the kind of lowdown, breakdown. Here's examples and reasons and further evidence that support why, my thesis is efficacious. In this case, why you should give us money. So you move on to table of contents. I think it's okay to have a table of contents because it gives the reader an idea of what's coming. So I would keep this in here, but depending on if you change anything, just make sure you reflect it in the TOC. And then you go on to the project description. So here, this seems to be, and here's where you're giving the 3 things that I was just looking at. So you're just basically copied and pasted, here's what the NSF is looking at. So instead, you want to focus on, here's what okay, if we're focusing on biomass combustion, which is what DP Clean Tech is quote-unquote pioneering, they're pioneering this biomass combustion technology, what are the deliverables that they're going to do, and what are you going to do with the money? So I would kind of immediately go into a brief history of that client. Here's what they have done. Here's why they need the money, because here's what they can do with that additional funding support. So that's what I would focus on in something like this. Go ahead and throw your references slides to the very end. So again, you want to treat it like an essay. References go at the end. You're going to want to quote, sorry, that just reminded me. I'm glad that reminded me of that. But you want your references at the very end, but because you have sources, you're going to need to, just like an essay, you're going to need to integrate citations throughout your presentation, your final one. So on every slide, you should have one or multiple in-text citations and or quotations that help to corroborate whatever it is you're arguing. So that's going to be something that you're going to need to integrate. The biographical sketch, yeah, this one is always confusing to me. I know it comes from the textbook, but what I would focus on here is personnel. So you want to focus on what you kind of want to change, because you're gonna want to change, because then you go into budget, and then facilities, equipment, and other resources. The topics are things you want to keep, but you're going to have to change the content. So like biographical sketch. So first you're going to have to figure out, so say DP Clean Tech, depending on what you think, what you want in your proposal for that company, do you want it for 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years? So, and then if so, then for biographical sketches, think of that as like personnel. Do they need to hire people? Do they need additional employees that are funded by this grant to help them do whatever the deliverable is? So if so, then that's what I would put here. So, but before this slide, I would put the Yes. No, you have it afterwards. Sorry. You want the budget slide to come first. So before you get into things like the biographical sketches, which would really be the biographical sketches of personnel that would be working on this project, or personnel you need to hire. So your budget needs to be, DP Clean Tech, or DP Tech, I can't remember what their name is now. DP Clean Tech, I think is what it is requesting 3 years of grant funding for X project, right? The project of whatever it is they're making. And then give a breakdown. What's going to happen in year 1? What's going to happen in year 2? What's going to happen in year 3? The NSF needs to know that. Again, they're not just going to throw $300,000 at you and be like, have fun. We don't need to know anything about what's happening with this government money that we're giving to you, because the NSF needs to report back to their government agency that oversees them, and the NSF has to give reports, right? Here's what these people are doing with this money that we gave them. So you want to focus on a timeline and maybe a brief overview of things that you would need. So include like what you're asking for, like how many years and how much money, what's the timeline look like, and then give an introduction to the things that you need to hire: personnel, space, equipment, technology, certain technology, certain tech or chemicals, I don't know, anything you might need for whatever deliverable it is that would be in this for this client, that the client would be expected to produce at the end of the grant project. So if it's 3 years, at the end of 3 years, they should be able to say, here's our deliverable. This is what we said we were going to do, and we did it. Here it is. Then go into, here's who we need to hire and why. We need to hire, this is the certification they need, these are the types of degrees they need to be whatever, and this is how much we're going to charge for them. Or, this is how much they're going to get paid for however long. I think, if I remember correctly, you were charging way too little. I'll look at that in a second. And then from there, I would go into the other things. So start with personnel and then go into, what you need. And I like that you break this up into what's already available to you versus what do you need. So, okay, we already have a lab, we already have this, we already have that, but here are the things we need. But then for any of the things you need to give a cost associated with that, and an end per year. So we're going to need this number of chemicals per year, so this is how much money each year it's going to cost, depending on whatever it is. So this is good, but it's going to need a little bolstered, potentially built into 2 slides. One where you state resources that are currently available to you that your client has, and then resources needed via the grant funding. And then I'm not sure what these look like, sources, supplementary documentation. So I don't know if that needs to go with your references pages or your references slides, or if this is something that needs to, because if I were the NSF, I'd be like, why are you giving me this information? So you always need to justify why you're giving somebody information. What's the benefit in telling somebody about this? So that's kind of how you're going to want to work on revising this. Is you're really missing without the client, you're missing an objective. So once you have the client nailed down, you'll be able to say, okay, we're asking for this money because for this client, with this grant funding opportunity, DP Clean Tech can do X, Y, and Z. And then it becomes much easier, if that's the right word, once you have the client and you understand why the client needs the money and how they would benefit from it, and how the NSF would benefit from it. That's usually the key. It's usually less about the client and more about the people giving out the money. Like, how are you going to help me meet the goals that I have given to me by the government? Like, if the government says we need more technology building and biomass combustion and clean energy, it's your job to dole out money to people who will do that. So, and then you say, okay, DP Clean Tech can do that, and here's how they can do it, and this is what they'll do in 3 years. And the NSF is like, great, I can go back to the government and say, this is what we're doing. So, once you do that, then you need to also but you're going to have to make sure you're doing that source integration on every single slide. Unless it's like table of contents, which obviously you don't need it. But every single slide, wherever you're giving information, you need to be supporting it, right? Okay, why is biomass combustion, of all the things that, because you list all the things, which you don't need to list this, but of all the things that they're listing for the CFP, why is it that biomass combustion technology and clean energy is the thing that the NSF should give grant funding for? So you kind of need to make a case for that, instead of gasification or fast pyrolysis. I'm not sure how to say that. It sounds like something about fire moving very quickly. I have no idea. But so you need to make a case for it, and you make a case for it by providing evidence, providing demonstration that the client is legit and the work they do can provide the NSF with what the NSF is asking for. Making sure you're integrating those sources throughout your presentation, and then definitely adding those slides that have the information about budget, timeline, how you plan on spending the money. If it's over 1 year, how do you plan on spending that money across however many years you're asking for? Going back to your planning sheet, I was looking at your personnel costs here. So they're really low. I mean, 18.5 for a chemical engineer, 18.4 for a mechanical engineer, and then 14.7 for a fire behavior analyst. That's like they'd be living on the streets. So you really want to Google like chemical engineer salary. That's probably what I would do if these are the types of personnel that you think needs to be hired. If DP does not, if that was your client, if they didn't already have this personnel and you needed to hire additional personnel, then you need to make sure that you're offering, because then what would happen if you got the grant, you would then start, if personnel hiring was on your list of things to do for that grant project, you would put out, you would do a job search. And if I was a chemical engineer and they were like, yeah, $18,500 a year, I'd be like, nope, not even a little bit. So you need to think about how you would compensate. Maybe it's $18,500 a year and we pay room and board. I don't know, right? Maybe that comes with additional, like maybe there's other things and then they make $18,500 a year, or maybe there's a monthly stipend but you also pay their housing. So you would need to think how you would compensate these people who would be working on the grant project. And if you aren't hiring personnel, then you still need to identify the people who are currently available to work on the grant project. So it just depends on who your client is. Okay, that's everything I've got right now. If your group has any questions, because you guys have a lot of revision and work to do, so if your group has any questions, particularly with the implementation of this idea of the concept of the new client, which is going to rattle things up in terms of where you guys are headed with revision, just don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, keep up the great work, and I will talk to you soon, I guess. Okay, bye.